Hannah, it's great to have you on today. Thanks so much for joining.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah. And as we were talking before we hit the record button, you mentioned something about talking to parents about how their children are losing their minds for a little bit, and that's a reality. So I thought, well, that's a great place to start because about every other day we're trying to figure out whether is it our kids losing their minds or are we losing our minds. So
Could be both.
which one is it?
It could be both. It could be both. So yes. I'm a former teacher, middle school. So I have a background in education and specifically working with students. And then right now I'm full-time vocational ministry working in women's ministry. And then, you got kids and all that involved with that. But yes, for a time period, our kids, our children, their brains literally change. The brain chemistry changes. And so with the onset of puberty, it could be as young as 8, but that it differs. But from 10 to 14, we see a lot of development going on. And actually, studies show that the amount of growth, the changes that are happening, parallels that of like toddlers, even
Hmm.
5 and under. So that development that's going on, it's that same development is going on in the middle school years, the puberty years. And the front part of your brain, which is like for decision making and logic, it literally shuts down. And so if your kid does something and you're like, that was so dumb, why did you do that? And if they say, I don't know, odds are they are completely
Hmm.
telling you the truth. They literally don't know. And so if you press them for an answer, they'll make up something, but odds are they're lying about it. And so the truth is they don't know. Their logic decision making is being impaired, and so we call it the reptilian part of the brain is really it's growing. So their brain is basically kind of shutting down so that the rest of their body can develop, right? And so they're functioning from that reptilian part of the brain, which is very it can be aggressive, it can be irrational, it can be really emotional, and goodness, it's everything that a stereotypical teen would
Hmm.
be. And so we see that's what's happening in their brains. And so they literally just kind of shut down for a while. But around 14 to 16, you'll see some twinkling, some lights flickering, and you're like, oh, there's some glimmers, there's hope going on here. And so the brain will not actually finish developing until your 20s. And some studies show that for guys it takes a little longer.
Yeah.
For
Yeah.
girls it's our early 20s, guys mid to late 20s. Some even say closer to 30. But that is what's happening. And so when our kids kind of lose it, when they're being irrational, the worst thing that we can do as parents is to match that, right? It's
Hmm.
to come back at them like, what is wrong with you? Fix your attitude. And I have done all those things where I'm like, oh my gosh, what is wrong with you? But to remember, oh, there is something really going on in their brain right now. There is something really happening. Their emotions even are bigger. They feel
Hmm.
them bigger. And when they're like, you don't understand what I'm feeling right now, there is some truth to that. Yes, we've been there, but we don't feel those emotions as intensely as they do in that moment because of
Right.
what's going on in their brain development. So, just if as parents, if we could be like, I'm going to note that as I'm navigating
Hmm.
parenting my child, right, and loving them and keeping that in the back of our mind. Yeah.
Yeah, I laugh with parents sometimes when they have fifth grade kids and just say, "Hey, enjoy this because this is the most logical and emotionally stable your child is going to be for a long time."
For
And
a
it's
while.
also it's also the smartest that you're going to be, at least in the eyes of your child, for probably the next 10 to 15 years. Some people
Yes.
get lucky and get it before that, but I was
Yep.
just, and sometimes you get lucky and it doesn't hit quite like that. Like I was joking with
Right.
my boys who are eighth and ninth grade, and I said something
Yeah.
like, boys, in the next few years, mom and dad are going to get really stupid. Um, and I said it's going to be weird because like we're not going to really change anything we do, but like we're going to get really really stupid, and then
Yeah.
somewhere along the way we'll get smart again. And one of them actually said, Dad, you said that like 2 or 3 years ago, and we still think you're fine. I was like, well, thank the Lord. That's a
Okay.
grace in there. It doesn't. So even as we talk now, I think it's good to remember
Right.
generalities. Don't panic because
That's
everybody's
right.
experience is unique and different. And even that fifth grade thing, some of them are already in it in fifth grade, and some of them don't hit it
Right.
until eighth or ninth grade. But one of the things I was thinking of as you were talking, you were a middle school teacher.
Yes.
And I feel so sad as we learn more and more about brain development. So you
Mhm.
have these kids whose brains are shutting off, whose emotions
Right.
are out of this world. And so what do? We stick them in an institutional holding pen with 1,000 other kids whose brains are shutting off, whose emotions are going through the world and don't have the ability to make um, any
Right.
kind of
Rational
decision with
decisions.
forethought.
Mhm.
And then we wonder, why in the world is my kid so, messed up or erratic? But a lot of it is just the culture and society we live in, where
Mhm.
12 and 13-year-olds spend their most time with other 12 and 13-year-olds, and that can have a cyclic
Right.
effect for bad. But again, it's not
Yeah.
hopeless, because people come out of it and
Right.
it's all still a season. And so
Mhm.
what we want to talk about and kind of concentrate today is I think pulling that in with what we would all admit is just an epidemic of worry and anxiety.
Mm.
That's one of the particular
Yes.
extreme emotions that especially our girls, I see it in guys a ton right now too, but
Yes.
I know even more so with our girls is
Mhm.
happening. And one of the other things, I had Sissy Goff on recently, and she mentioned that they did a study in like 2017, and I think it was like 1 in 8 teenagers
Mm.
had experienced extreme anxiety, and post COVID it was 1 in 3. So
Oh my
now, I mean,
goodness.
it's epidemically high. So um, I would love to spend our time today talking about um, how can we speak the gospel? How can we have practical truths? What are the things that you have found to be most
Mm.
helpful to equip moms and dads with in
Right.
helping when their children are in these extreme times of worry, anxiety, panic, everything's falling apart. So I'm
Right.
just going to kind of give you the floor, and we'll talk back and forth on these.
Yeah. Yeah. So as I'm sitting here listening to you, I'm picturing a few of my former students, and even, my own daughters who have had bouts of anxiety that they have struggled with. And my first piece of advice, or just where to start, is take a deep breath. Like, we know that God is in control, that this isn't anything that's too big for him. And before we start spiraling into this mode of
Mm-hmm.
panic, what do I do? Frustration, just take a deep breath. And I encourage my ladies that I work with in women's ministry and mamas to, we need to be in the word. We need that truth. God's word it's alive, it's active, it's good for training and teaching and, disciplining, and it's life. Jesus himself talks about how God's word is life. And so before we panic, we need to make sure that we're grounded in the word, and that we're asking God. We're just not in the word, but we're doing the word. We're asking him to help us live it out, to give us discernment and wisdom to raise our children and to speak into their lives. And so that would be my first thing, is do that.
Yeah.
Do that,
Take a
right?
deep breath.
And
And you know
yeah,
what, Hannah, I want to highlight, let's not just think you're talking metaphorically. Um, I
right.
think it's really good to literally take a deep breath, and there's a lot of
Like,
physiological reasons
breathe.
behind that. I remember doing some studies in I think it's Ted Shimmer, The Freedom Fight from Pornography, and he talks about ways when people are going into temptation. One of the very first things that they talk to them about doing is breathing, deep breathing,
Mm,
because you talked about reptilian brain with our kids earlier.
right.
Well, the logic parts of your brain, the rational parts of your brain, get shut off from oxygen. So when we began to even just literally take a few deep breaths,
Mm,
not only are we giving ourselves times to pause for that initial emotional roller coaster to go by, but you're activating the helpful parts of your brain. And like you
right.
said, you're remembering truth, remembering scripture in that time. So I just want to make sure that people don't think that you're
Yes.
metaphorically just saying, well, just take a deep breath and do it. Like,
Calm down.
really
Right. No,
take
like
a deep breath.
literally.
Yeah. Yeah. Good.
Yes,
So,
it's funny you mentioned that. My husband was former military. He was an infantry soldier, and so we've battled PTSD, which is also a lot of anxiety,
yeah.
depression, things that are tied with that. And so he actually was in Walter Reed for about 30 days, and the
Mm,
tactics that they taught him was breathing and counting, and
yeah.
just those calming down. So yeah, all that, it's all connected there. That's very, thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah,
Um,
very good.
it's
So now that
something,
I've
something
breathed,
else, now that
now
you've
that I'm
breathed
breathing
and
again, now what?
you, now you are in the word. You are,
Hmm.
and one of the things that I steer new believers to, I steer myself to, just in general, I'm like, go back to what Jesus says. Go back to the Sermon on the Mount. What does kingdom life look like? And living it out. And it's Matthew 5 through 7 is where I'm specifically looking at. And I'm like, go back and revisit that. What does he say? What does he say? Blessed are, and
Hmm.
when you pray and when you fast, and then do those things. um that's where I start with the parents, and then
Hmm.
emulate those with your kids. Like, pray for your kids, invite your kids to pray. They're going to see you walking out your faith. You're inviting them to walk out their faith, in that. So that would be what I'm saying there. And the next would be open communication. Like, when we communicate with our children, sometimes it's best that we just listen. you know um, if you can't get a conversation started, you don't know how to get a conversation started, I would recommend, over dinner, you have conversation cards, literally, that we call them table topics, and we bought them from
Hmm.
Amazon. And it's just these random questions, and it gets conversation going. And what you find is it takes any awkwardness off the table, but all of a sudden you're talking more than just about what's your favorite animal. All of a sudden you end up on what's going on in their classroom, in their lives, and you're listening, right? Another thing is, and I catch myself doing this, I'm a helper. I want to help. I want to solve problems. But when my kiddos come to me, when my daughters come to me, I have to refrain from offering help. And that sounds crazy maybe, but I have to sometimes say, okay, sweetheart, are you telling mama this because you want me to help in some way or give advice? Or are you just wanting me to listen? And often they're like, Mom, I just want you to listen. And
This
I get
is,
that too.
yeah, this is really like such a big deal. Um, what you're talking about is something that I've learned, and it's funny because the roles are a little bit reversed. When I'm talking with my wife, I've learned over time
Mm,
to ask that question, like, "Hey, are you wanting a solution, or are you just wanting to listen?" Because as a
right.
guy, generally, I don't tell anybody my stuff unless like I want a practical solution for it. But I
Right.
understand, sometimes they're just trying to talk it out. Now, in our parenting roles, um, it's something that is interesting that I have found kind of a role reversal there. And I think it's that mama's heart of like hating to see them suffer or go through hardship. And but
Yes.
the thing is, like, there's always going to be mean kids. There's always going to be
Yes.
conflict. Somebody's going to cut you down. And we're blessed to have a really tight, large spiritual community of like moms and
Mm,
dads that are friends who have kids who are friends. Um, and it's that hard balance of like, well, when do I go to the other parent with this?
right.
And normally, like, I think my default is, man, I'm trying to equip my kids to figure things out on their own. And so
Yes. Right.
let's not intervene too quickly, because even
Hmm.
though we think we're solving the problem, we're actually creating an incompetent human being. We are
Right.
paralyzing them, and we're making them think they have to have somebody to get through their solutions. Now, I know that's a balance, Hannah, because unfortunately the
Right.
world throws really horrible things at our kids that are beyond their level. And so
Yes.
we have to really kind of walk in the spirit and figure that out. But I think our default
Hmm.
should not be to rescue and fix. Would you say that's accurate?
Right. I would absolutely say that's accurate. And it can be even simple things. Like one of the things that I'm thinking of right off the bat is my daughter, when she forgets her lunch. One time I was like, absolutely, I will bring it to you. The next time, I don't know what to tell you, baby. You're on your own, right?
Mm-hmm.
She forgets it. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm not leaving work to bring you your lunch.
Right.
And some of my mom friends were like, Hannah. And I'm like, she has to figure this out. And so
Mm-hmm.
thankfully, she had some great friends that helped piece together a lunch. But I'll say she hasn't forgot it again. She
Yeah.
hasn't. She hasn't forgot that.
Yeah.
And
Because if
some
you
conflict.
go get it, she doesn't have a problem. She has a perfectly good system. You
That's
have a
right.
problem because your day is disrupted. And so,
Yeah.
why would she change if, and we experience this all the time. So I'm speaking
Right.
from a lot of experience. If they keep making irresponsible decisions and I keep bailing them out, they don't have a problem. They have a great system.
That's
I'm the
right.
one that's
You
bearing
have
the
a
brunt of
problem.
it. So yeah, I got a problem.
Hmm.
So I gotta let them have appropriate problems so that they learn to carry their load.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I mean, that's just a small example, but to let them work that out, to deal with the consequences when they're not as serious, then they know
Yeah,
how to deal with their choices in later in life, right? Like
that's
that when
really
the
good.
stakes are higher. Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
Thank you. So, other, yes, you want to rescue. Yes, you want to help. But I'm going to tell you, it reminds me of this metaphor I've heard over and over. It reminds me of the butterfly and the chrysalis. And if you help it out too soon, you actually kill it, right? It needs to go through that struggle to push the blood and the fluids to parts of the wings that will help it fly. And so when we're coming in to swoop in and we're not letting them struggle, we are impairing them. We are crippling them. They're going to become anxious adults because they don't know how to make decisions. They they're scared to make decisions. They have no one to back them up, and we're not going to be here forever, right? They need to know how to stand, and I want to equip them to the best of my ability. And part of that is letting them make these little choices now. Let them forget their homework, and I'm
Hmm.
sorry you took a late grade or you had to take a zero or whatever that is, and let them feel that now, and that way they build this characteristic of responsibility, right?
Yeah.
And even, in faith life, perseverance is a marker of our faith. And what do you persevere through if you have no struggles? If we're constantly clearing the deck for them? I know we had some drama in our student ministry, and my daughter, my youngest one, was like, I don't know what to do with this. She was kind of caught in the middle with two friends that were, fighting. And I was like, well, let's think through this. Talk to me. What's kind of going on? Like, what does it look like to look like Jesus in the situation? What would and just thinking through that, the fruits of the Spirit, and how do we display that? And there's no cookie cut right answer, right?
Right.
It's just how do you process that, and walking them through that.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's just so helpful. I recently came across an article. I think it was from Huffington Post, which is really it was surprising to me because they're pretty left leaning in a lot of things.
Mm.
The title of the article was something like "The Number One Thing Parents Do to Screw Up Their Kids" or something like that,
Mm.
and and it was a really long article. But kind of when you get down to the core of it, basically they were saying psychologists across the board say the number one thing that parents do to really mess up their kids is prioritizing their children's happiness. And so if your
Oh.
parental world is revolved around making sure your kids are
Mm-hmm.
happy, you ultimately set them up to be the most unhappy human beings over the long run because we need to experience times of sadness, of grief, of being
Yes.
upset, of boredom, and of being able
Right.
to walk
Right.
through those, that these are all good and natural emotions. And so I think in the same thing, um, worry is contagious, right? So
Mm-hmm.
we have to be mindful of that, and just because somebody gets sick in my house doesn't mean I have to get that sickness. If I have somebody sick in my
Right.
house, like I want to help take care of them, but I also want to wash my hands. I want to make sure that I'm not eating after
Mm-hmm.
them. I don't want to catch their sickness. And so when I see worry and anxiety and hyper emotions in the house, I need to be careful because that can be contagious. And if it is, it's not, they didn't get rid of their worry. We've just compounded the situation. And so how do
Right.
I, how do I help them observe, but let that stay on them to the degree that it's appropriate for whatever their age is. And I think you're right on with this. You got to let them develop their muscles of like, hey, I can fix this. I
Mm-hmm.
can get over this and I can do
Right.
this. And I don't have to have
Yeah.
somebody walk me through it all the time. That's really good.
That's right. I tell my kids a lot, and I know they get tired of hearing it. I'm like, you can do hard things. You
Hmm.
can do hard things. Perseverance is a mark of our faith, and struggles are going to come. And I would rather them be, I forgot my lunch, than, the
Right.
crazy things later in life when I
Yeah.
can't be there for them.
Yep. All right. What else would you encourage parents as far as helping set the stage for
Yeah.
not living in
Yeah.
worry and anxiety?
Gosh, I mean, definitely. One of the things that I would say, um, there in the education world, gosh, in my training, it's been years ago. We went through a training. It was called ACEs. It's like adverse childhood experiences, and it's like
Mm-hmm.
when you have adverse childhood experiences, and if you have so many of them, it's kind of a good predictor of kind of life you're going to have.
Right.
Are you
Yeah.
going to kind of repeat some of these generational things that have happened in your past? And so I had some crazy trauma in my childhood, and I was looking at my ACEs score and was like, wow, I should not be here, right? Like I should be drugged out somewhere and in this crazy vicious cycle, because of the way the family, situations and stuff in the past. But that's not true. And so my reason for that is God. But God
Mm-hmm.
got involved in my life, and there were my parents who were wonderful, loved them. But there were also other Christian adults in my life who poured into me that I looked up to, that I could go to when I was like, I can't really talk to my parents about this situation. I need to go to someone else. And so, one of the determining factors of keeping kids off the bad path, or however you want to describe that, was good, healthy adult mentor relationships in their life. And one of the best ways that I've seen that play out is in student ministry, when you've got
Mm-hmm.
student pastors and some godly women pouring into your kids. So to parents, I would say, who what other adults are pouring into your students? Are they in student ministry? Are they in any extracurricular activities where they're seeing other people live out their faith, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're not just seeing, oh, mom and dad are, because like you said earlier, we get dumb, right? We get dumb
Yeah.
apparently. And they're not just like,
Right.
oh, mom and dad are just talking about this stuff. Are they seeing it in other people? A fun story about this, our son struggled with some anxiety and depression in high school. And it was so stressful. And we would say something to him and he would rattle against it. But then there was this great guy at church, a couple of them actually, that loved working out at the gym. And our son would work out with these guys, and they would say the same thing to him,
Yep.
and he would receive it, and he would
Yep.
receive it. And I would say that watching my son come out of that time in his life, we did Christian counseling. He had some great godly influences, but watching him come out of that, those men who poured into him were part of that, and in a
Mm-hmm.
way that Stephen and I just developmentally, because of where our son was, we as his parents couldn't reach him in that moment, right? And
Yeah.
so I
And
asked parents, who are those adults?
yeah. And I would encourage this. This is something we do in our student ministry. Is I regularly ask parents, hey, talk to me, or especially your student's small group leader, and let them know what's going on in your child's life. That
Mm-hmm.
way they can kind of naturally, casually bring up in random conversation the very issues,
Yes.
because I know that there are periods when the last person that my child is going to hear is me. And exactly what
Yes.
you said, the same thing
Mm-hmm.
said by somebody else is like the most profound thing in the world to them.
Yeah.
And my default is to want to be like bitter and angry that, well, why didn't they hear me? But ultimately I want to rejoice that they heard truth. And so
That's
we
right.
encourage our small group leaders every month, try to make a contact with the parents of your kids, so that you
Yeah.
can kind of hear what's going on. And then the same thing, especially parents, if you're listening, I'm a youth pastor. I've got a lot of my parents that listen to this. I don't know what's going on in your kid's life. Like I see
Right.
them, for the most dedicated ones, I see like 4 hours a week. You see them thousands and thousands and thousands of hours over the course of a
Right.
year. And so you should take advantage of that. I absolutely agree. And sometimes it's a coach, right? Sometimes it's your student ministry leader.
Right.
Sometimes it's a coach. There's a karate instructor in our town, who's a devout believer. And
Mm.
when you are going for your instructional belt, he's a taekwondo. He'd be upset if I said karate. You have to get a recommendation from your teacher at school and your parents that you are honoring them with the way you treat them and the way you carry out your responsibilities. And if you don't do
Mm.
that, then he will not promote you to the next level of his belt. So again, you're going to find these Christians and believers. Sometimes they're going to be the
Yeah.
small group leader, but sometimes they're going to be in other things. And they really have a lot of power in speaking to your kids.
Right.
Was it Kara Powell? I think they did a study on sticky faith, what keeps kids in church
Ah,
after they
yes.
graduate. And one of the
Yep.
primary things was multiple connected relationships with adults in the church, not peers, but by the time they graduate high school, can they look around and
Yep.
find 6 or 7 adults that they have deep connected relationships with? And that's what helps
Mhm.
carry them through what are often the stupid years that come. And so that starts
That's
though when
right.
they're in middle school, right? That starts in
It
elementary and middle
does.
school with
Yes,
these relationships here. So I love that, keeping them
it
connected like that.
does. It does. And the question that it just made me think of too is, as adults, how are we connecting with students in our
Mm-hmm.
community and in our church? And what I love seeing happening right now at our church, on the women's serve team, I have women from different age groups serving, and we're all together. We all lead different ministries, and one of their jobs is to report, what are you doing as a ministry? And then one of our other jobs is to, how do we connect those ministries to each other? So we have our
Love
young
that.
girls that have been collecting supplies for the widows group who's serving a veterans home. And then the
Mm,
widows group is also taking snacks to our college and professional groups on their worship night. So you have these
sweet.
grandma relationships happening, and it's done very intentionally because of reasons that you're talking about. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and it's, I call it like a Titus 2 model, but essentially it's us loving God and loving people well and building community, because we are wired that way. And that's why we have the issues, when we see the pandemic with more and more people having anxiety. We were disconnected, and we are a people who, we were made to connect. We were made to connect.
Yeah.
So yeah,
You
as
know,
adults, how are we connecting?
so and that's a huge thing. Like, don't drop your kids off at youth group and then you stay disengaged from
Right.
every other adult
Get
relationship in
involved.
the church and kids. And
Mm-hmm.
also I would just encourage, you want to be in your kids' lives, you want to be in their friends' lives. You don't have to be something you're not. Like, let's just be honest, some
Right.
of us are not cool. And so if you try to be cool, like, you just come off really
They
foolish.
know.
Right. But you know what every kid thinks
Yeah.
is cool is if you feed them. And so if
Yes.
you don't have to be funny, you don't have to be clever, but
Mm-hmm.
if you can keep their belly stocked, then you're
Yeah.
cool. And your house will be the house they want to come to. You're the person that they want to see.
Yes.
And then it's amazing. The ministry of food just opens up these
Mm-hmm.
conversations that you could never get if you were actually sitting in a Bible study with them. So, I'm
Yes.
Hannah, I'm thinking through your list here. Take a deep breath, like literally take a deep breath,
Yes.
be in the word and remember the word, pray for your kids, pray with
Mm-hmm.
your kids, keep open communication, have dinner table
Mm-hmm.
conversations, letting them deal with the consequences, um, getting them involved in student ministry, not just so they have peers, but
Yes.
so that they have other healthy adults in their life.
Adults. Right.
I'm looking at this and it's like, this stuff is not profound. This is all doable,
No.
and it's
Right.
so basic. So why are we having to spend all this time talking about it? And I'm thinking, I coach my son's 14, 15-year-old basketball team, and we do layup
Mm.
drills at the beginning of every practice, and the kids are never
Yeah.
excited about doing layup drills. But you know what happens when we get in a game? Half of the shots taken are layups, and most of those are missed because you don't practice them and you don't do the basic stuff. And so in
Right.
anything, the basics make up 90% of the battle. And I think what you've laid out is very doable. You didn't just tell them some
Mm.
monumental thing that a mom or a dad cannot do. These are all
Right.
things that the Lord has equipped us to do. And I really love that. And it doesn't solve anxiety. It doesn't take away the problems of the world,
Right.
but it lowers the threshold of everything. And I appreciate you
It
doing that. And
does.
I'd like to give you a couple moments. You have recently released a book that I would love for you to take a couple moments to share about.
Yeah, yeah. It's called In Case You Forget, 42 Truths About Who You Are in Jesus. And I'm speaking specifically to teen girls, because the whole thought is, you can't know who you are if you don't know whose you are. And we need to know that our identity is grounded in Jesus. And what does that look like? How do you flesh that out? And so really, again, it's nothing profound. It's just taking God's word and pulling out those truths to tell girls, this is who you are. And what we have found is there is a direct connection, a link to stress and anxiety and worry, when you don't when you don't have a firm foundation of who you are, your identity, right? Because it's always shifting. If you're chasing happiness, or if the world's expectations are crazy for girls. I mean, guys, I can't really speak to you
Hmm.
all. I know that you have your own, but for girls, it's like this moving target. We have to look a certain way, weigh a certain weight, be a certain career. I mean, you've got people who are like, no, you need to be a stay-at-home mom, and others are like, no, you need to have a huge career. And anyway, it's just this crazy target, and our girls are suffering from that. And so I want to say, all right, I am a lot of things. I'm a mom, I'm a wife, an army wife, I'm an author, I'm in full-time ministry. Like, I'm a lot of things, but that's not who I am. I am who God says that I am. And literally, there are times where I have written those truths out and I have to read that. So when a kid moves out of the house and I'm like, oh my gosh,
Hmm.
me as a mom, that season of my life is changing, right? All this, I'm getting ready to be 40. What is that? The season of my life is changing, but that doesn't, who I am never changes. So I'm giving these practical truths to these girls to hold on to be like, this is who you are when everything around you is telling you you have to be a certain way. The only thing you have to be and that you are is a child of God. And what does that look like? All of these truths that he says. And that's I think that if we could speak to that, we're going to speak to some serious anxiety issues and to the worry. If we could focus on God's truth and letting him work through us.
Your book, In Case You Forget, it kind of goes along with one of our points of getting other godly spiritual mentors to speak into your child's life. So
Mm,
here's a little cheat code. Let Hannah speak into your daughter's life. And
I would
she
love
might be
that.
saying the same thing that you said 1,500 times, but it's coming
Yeah.
from somebody else. And it's amazing how the Lord will use that. So Hannah,
Yeah.
where can they pick up a copy of your book? Where's the best place to send them?
So anywhere books are sold, I mean, I'll always send people to Amazon. It's the quickest,
Mm-hmm.
easiest way to grab a book. But yeah, so you can go to hannahconway.com and snag a copy, but head to Amazon. Let's be real.
Okay. So we'll tell people you can head to Amazon, but if you're not interested in
Yeah.
helping Jeff Bezos fly to Mars with any more money,
That's right.
HannahRConway.com. Yeah.
HannahRconway.com. You can go to
HannahRConway.com will
Lifeway.
maybe give
Yep.
Hannah another nickel from the book if she
That's
gets it.
right.
So
Maybe.
yeah. Yeah.
Maybe.
Hey, thank you so much
But
for your time. Wish you the very best and just
thanks.
appreciate your ministry.
Thank you so much.